The silence in the room was so thick I felt like I could drown in it. It pressed in on me from all sides, a heavy blanket woven from the scent of old paper lemon polish and the cloying perfume Chloe wore. I sat alone, my hands sweating so much I had to wipe them on my pants. Across the vast mahogany table, my younger brother Noah looked perfectly at ease. He leaned back in his leather chair, one arm draped casually over the back of Chloe's. My Chloe, my fiancée. Her hand was intertwined with his, a detail so brazenly wrong it made my stomach clench. Mr. Abernathy, our family's lawyer for as long as I could remember, finally cleared his throat. The sound was like a gavel striking wood sharp and final. He picked up the first page of my parents' last will and testament, the paper crinkling loudly in the suffocating quiet. He adjusted his spectacles and began to read in a dry, dispassionate monotone that offered no comfort. To my beloved younger son, Noah Carter, he started, and I saw Noah straighten up, a flicker of anticipation in his eyes. Chloe leaned in closer to him, her focus absolute. I bequeath the primary family residence located in Chestnut Hill, Boston, along with all its furnishings and property. A small, satisfied sigh escaped Chloe's lips. She squeezed Noah's hand. I felt a cold dread begin to creep up my spine. That was the house we all grew up in, the one filled with every memory I held dear. Mr. Abernathy continued, his voice a steady drone of financial terms. Furthermore, Noah Carter shall inherit the entirety of the Carter family's diversified stock portfolio, currently valued at approximately $600,000. My breath caught in my throat. $600,000. That was life-changing money. Noah's face remained a mask of calm composure, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch into a smirk he couldn't quite contain. He was the golden child, the chosen one. He always had been. Finally, the lawyer said the remainder of the liquid assets held within a family trust fund shall be transferred to Noah Carter upon his 27th birthday. He paused, looking over his glasses, first at Noah, then at me. This brings the total estimated value of his inheritance to just under $1 million. The words hung in the air, shimmering with power. $1 million. Chloe turned to Noah, her eyes shining with an adoration that felt like a physical blow. She whispered something in his ear and he chuckled softly, a low, arrogant sound that grated on my nerves. They were in their own world, a world I was clearly not a part of. I felt myself shrinking in my chair, the silence returning now heavier than before. It was my turn. Mr. Abernathy shuffled his papers, setting aside the thick stack concerning Noah's fortune and picking up a single solitary sheet. My entire life boiled down to one page. He cleared his throat again. And to my eldest son, Liam Carter. I leaned forward, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. There had to be something, a separate account, a property, a sign that they hadn't completely forgotten me. The lawyer read the next words slowly, almost apologetically. I bequeath the family's wooden cabin located at Point Mackenzie, Alaska, and all its contents. That was it. The sentence just ended. For a moment nobody moved. The air crackled with unspoken shock. A cabin. A rotting, forgotten cabin in the middle of nowhere that we hadn't visited in over 15 years. That was my inheritance. The silence was shattered by a sudden sharp bark of laughter from Noah. He tried to stifle it with a cough, but it was too late. The sound, ugly and mocking, echoed off the wood-paneled walls. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. My eyes were fixed on Chloe. I was searching for a sliver of support, a hint of compassion, anything, but I found none. Her face was a canvas of raw, unfiltered emotion. First came disbelief, her jaw slack. Then a wave of acute embarrassment washed over her, her cheeks flushing a deep red. Finally, her expression hardened into something I had never seen before, something that chilled me to the bone. It was pure, unadulterated contempt. She slowly, deliberately pulled her hand away from Noah's and slid her chair back an inch, a small movement that felt like a continent shifting between us. She wouldn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed on a point on the wall just over my shoulder, as if the very sight of me was unbearable. In that single frozen moment, I knew. I hadn't just lost my inheritance. I had lost everything. The cold, dismissive glare from the woman I was supposed to marry was my true inheritance, a judgment more brutal and binding than any words written on paper. The drive back to the apartment was a blur. My mind was a roaring vacuum deaf to the blare of traffic and the angry horns of other drivers. I don't remember parking the car or walking up the 3 flights of stairs. The first thing that registered with any clarity was the sight that greeted me when I pushed open our front door. A single large suitcase stood by the entrance like a somber monument. It was Chloe's, the one she used for our weekend trips, now packed and ready for a journey I wasn't invited on. The finality of it hit me harder than any of the lawyer's words. She was in the living room, methodically emptying a bookshelf of her belongings and placing them into a cardboard box. She didn't look up when I walked in. She moved with a cold, efficient grace that terrified me. The cozy apartment we had built together, filled with inside jokes and shared memories, was being clinically dismantled. Chloe. My voice sounded weak, foreign, a stranger's plea in a room that was no longer mine. She finally stopped and turned to face me. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes hard as polished stone. She gestured toward the coffee table with her chin. Laying there, gleaming under the afternoon light, was the diamond engagement ring I had spent 3 months of my salary on. It looked small and insignificant, a foolish trinket from a life that no longer existed. Alaska, she said, and the single word was filled with a universe of disappointment. Are you serious, Liam? Her voice was dangerously calm, which was always worse than when she yelled. I have waited for you. I have stood by you, hoping you would finally do something with your life, something to prove you weren't living in Noah's shadow. I took a step toward her, my hands outstretched in a desperate, pleading gesture. It's just a cabin, Chloe. It doesn't change anything. We still have each other. We can build our own future. The sound that escaped her lips wasn't a laugh. It was a sharp, ugly burst of air devoid of any humor. It was the sound of pity. We, she repeated the word, dripping with venom. No, there is no we. She took a step back, creating a chasm between us. There is you, Liam, a pathetic loser. I can't build a future with a man who is content with nothing. The words struck me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Pathetic loser. The phrase echoed in the silent room, branding itself onto my soul. This was the woman who had said she loved me, the woman I had planned to spend the rest of my life with. And in the space of an afternoon, I had become nothing more than an obstacle, a disappointment to be discarded. Please, I whispered, the fight draining out of me, leaving only a hollow ache. Don't do this. It's already done, she said, her voice flat. She picked up her purse from the counter, her movements brisk and final. She walked toward the door, not even glancing in my direction as she passed. Her hand closed around the handle of her suitcase. She paused at the doorway, her back still to me. For a fleeting, foolish moment, I thought she might turn around, that I might see a flicker of the woman I fell in love with. But when she spoke, her voice was colder than the Alaskan winter that now awaited me. Don't ever contact me again. And then she was gone. The door slammed shut, the sound a deafening explosion that vibrated through the floorboards and up into my bones. It was the sound of an ending, the absolute, irrevocable end of my world. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence she left behind. The apartment felt vast and empty, a tomb filled with the ghosts of our laughter. My gaze fell upon the ring still sitting on the coffee table, a symbol of a promise that had been shattered into a million pieces. A guttural sound, something between a sob and a roar, tore itself from my throat. I stumbled forward, my legs barely holding me. I snatched the ring from the table, its cold metal biting into my palm. With all the rage, all the pain, all the humiliation churning inside me, I hurled it across the room. It struck the wall with a pathetic clink and disappeared behind the sofa. But it wasn't enough. The pressure in my chest was unbearable, a crushing weight of failure. I threw my head back and screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure agony that clawed its way out of the depths of my broken heart. I had truly, completely lost everything. The next few days bled into one another in a hazy fog of cheap whiskey and suffocating self-pity. The silence in the apartment was a living entity, constantly reminding me of Chloe's absence. Every creak of the floorboards was a ghost of her footsteps. Every shadow in the corner held the shape of her memory. I existed on a diet of stale crackers and bitter regret, the curtains drawn tight against a world that I no longer felt a part of. The man who had walked into that lawyer's office full of modest hopes for the future was gone. In his place was a hollowed-out shell of a man haunted by 2 words that played on a loop in his mind. Pathetic loser. It was on the fourth day that my phone buzzed on the cluttered coffee table, the vibration startlingly loud in the dead quiet. For a wild, stupid moment, my heart leaped with the hope that it was her, that she had changed her mind. But the name on the screen was Noah's. The message was short, brutally efficient, and devoid of any empathy. It read, "Get your stuff out of the storage unit by the end of the month. I need the space." That was it. No. How are you holding up? No, I'm sorry for how things went down. Just a cold, logistical command. He had taken my home, my future, my fiancé's loyalty, and now he needed my storage space. It was the final casual twist of the knife. The last shovelful of dirt on the grave of my old life. The message wasn't just an instruction. It was a confirmation of my new status. I was no longer family. I was just an inconvenience, an obstacle to be cleared away. Something inside me, something that had been dormant and drowning in sorrow, finally snapped. A white, hot rage, clean and pure, burned through the fog of my despair. I threw the half-empty bottle of whiskey against the wall, and the sound of shattering glass was immensely satisfying. I wouldn't let them erase me. Fueled by this newfound anger, I stalked over to my laptop and ripped it open. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I typed the words that had been mocking me for days. Point, Mackenzie, Alaska. The search results flooded the screen, and each image was a confirmation of my exile. There were no charming log cabins or scenic mountain vistas, just endless, unforgiving expanses of snow, bleak, windswept plains under a pale, indifferent sky, trees that looked like frozen skeletons clawing at the heavens. It was a landscape of absolute desolation. It was a place where people went to disappear. It was perfect. My breath came in ragged bursts. They wanted to throw me away. They thought I was nothing. Fine. I would go to the nothingness they had left me. I would embrace it. This wasn't a choice born of hope. It was an act of pure, unadulterated defiance. My fingers found the airline website, my movements sharp and jerky. I didn't search for round trips. I clicked the box that said one way. Anchorage, Alaska. The flight was for the day after tomorrow. I entered my credit card information without a second thought, the numbers a final prayer to a God I no longer believed in. The confirmation page appeared. It was done. I had a one-way ticket to the end of the world. A strange calm settled over me then. The anger receded, leaving behind a cold, hard sense of purpose. I walked into the bedroom and pulled my old army duffel bag from the back of the closet. I began to pack my motions methodical. I took only the essentials. Thermal clothes, sturdy boots, a hunting knife my grandfather had given me years ago. Nothing sentimental. Nothing from my past. As I emptied my nightstand, my fingers brushed against a small silver picture frame. It was a photo of Chloe and me taken last summer on the coast. We were smiling, happy, oblivious to the fault line running just beneath the surface of our lives. I looked at the face of the man in the picture, at his easy smile and hopeful eyes. I didn't recognize him anymore. With a steady hand, I took the photo out of its frame, walked into the kitchen and dropped it into the trash can right on top of the broken whiskey bottle. The man in that picture was dead, and I was going to Alaska to bury him. Landing in Anchorage felt like stepping onto another planet. The air was different here, thin and sharp, so cold it felt like swallowing tiny needles with every breath. The Boston cold I was used to was a damp, miserable chill that seeped into your bones. This was something else entirely. This was an active, aggressive cold, a predator that clawed at any exposed skin and promised a swift, clean death. The airport was small and functional, and as I stepped outside, the sheer scale of the wilderness that surrounded it was staggering. Mountains jagged and white-clawed at a sky the color of faded steel. There was a profound, intimidating silence to this place, a quiet that seemed to absorb all the small, insignificant sounds of human activity. I had arranged to rent an old beat-up pickup truck, the kind with more rust than paint. The man at the counter, a burly figure with a thick beard and an even thicker accent, just grunted when I gave him the address for the cabin. He handed me the keys and a paper map with a red circle drawn around a remote area. "Roads get bad out there," he mumbled, his eyes scanning my city clothes with thinly veiled amusement. "You get stuck. You're on your own." His words proved to be prophetic. The paved roads gave way to gravel, and the gravel eventually dissolved into a barely visible track carved through endless snow and skeletal trees. The truck groaned and protested, its tires spinning uselessly in the deepening drifts. Then with a sickening lurch, the vehicle slid sideways and came to an abrupt, jarring halt. Its back wheels sunk deep in a frozen ditch. I tried to rock it free, shifting from drive to reverse, but the engine just whined in protest, the tires digging themselves a deeper grave. I was miles from anywhere. The red circle on the map was still a considerable distance away. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my forced composure. It was then that I noticed the sky. The pale gray had darkened to a bruised purple, and the wind, which had been a low whisper, was beginning to howl, whipping snow across the landscape in ghostly sheets. A set of headlights appeared behind me. A larger, more capable truck, clearly belonging to a local, pulled up. The driver, the same man who had rented me the truck, rolled down his window. A blast of warm air and the smell of coffee hit me. "Told you," he said, his voice flat. He wasn't gloating, just stating a fact. "Can you give me a tow?" I asked, my teeth chattering. "Or a ride I can pay you?" He shook his head, his gaze fixed on the ominous sky. "Storm's coming in fast. A bad one. I'm not getting stuck out here with you. Your cabin's about 5 miles that way." He pointed down the track. "If you walk fast, you might make it before it hits full force." "Good luck." He didn't wait for a reply. He put his truck in reverse, expertly navigated a 3-point turn and drove away, his taillights disappearing into the swirling snow. I was alone. The reality of my situation crashed down on me with the weight of an avalanche. "Good luck." The words were a death sentence. The wind was a physical force now pushing against me, stealing my breath. I grabbed my duffel bag from the truck, pulled my hat down low, and started walking. Each step was a monumental effort. The snow was up to my knees, and the wind drove icy particles into my face that felt like sandblasting. Within minutes, the truck was completely swallowed by the blizzard, and I was a solitary speck in a swirling vortex of white. There was no path, no landmarks, just the relentless, disorienting storm. I lost all sense of direction, all sense of time. My world shrank to the next agonizing step, the next burning breath. My body began to betray me. The cold was no longer a surface sensation. It was a deep, invasive ache in my muscles, my joints, my very marrow. My shivering became uncontrollable, violent spasms that racked my entire frame. I stumbled and fell, my face plunging into the soft, suffocating snow. The thought of just lying there, of letting the cold take me, was seductive. It would be so easy. A quiet white death. No more pain, no more humiliation, just sleep. The image of Noah's mocking laugh and Chloe's contemptuous sneer flashed in my mind, and a spark of anger, the last ember of my will to live, flared to life. I would not die here. I would not give them the satisfaction. With a guttural roar, I pushed myself up and staggered forward, one agonizing step after another. I don't know how long I walked. It could have been an hour or a lifetime. And then, through the blizzard, I saw it. A dark, jagged shape against the white. The cabin. Relief so profound it almost buckled, my knees washed over me. I stumbled the last 100 yards, my body screaming in protest. The place was a wreck, even worse than I had imagined. It was a skeletal ruin, a testament to years of neglect. A large section of the roof had caved in, and snow had drifted into one corner of the single room. The windows were broken, jagged teeth of glass grinning at the storm. But it had 4 walls, and for now, that was enough. I practically fell through the door, my duffel bag dropping to the floor with a thud. The wind howled through the broken windows, and it was barely warmer inside than it was out. Fire. I needed a fire. I saw a small stone fireplace and a pile of damp-looking wood next to it. My hands were numb, clumsy claws, but I managed to pull my lighter from my pocket. I flicked the wheel, a weak spark but no flame. I tried again, and again. Nothing. The lighter was soaked through, utterly useless. The last vestige of my hope died. I was going to freeze to death in this ruin, a final pathetic end to a pathetic life. I slumped against the wall, defeated, and then I felt it again. That same white-hot rage that had propelled me to buy the ticket. Rage at my parents, at Noah, at Chloe, at this godforsaken cabin. It was a defiant, primal scream against the universe. I would not die quietly. My eyes landed on a rusty axe leaning against the fireplace. With a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed it. The woodpile was too damp, but the floorboards were old and dry. With a roar of fury and frustration, I swung the axe down with all my might, aiming for the center of the floor. The wood splintered with a satisfying crack. I swung again and again, the rhythmic violence a release for all my pent-up agony. On the 4th swing, there was a different sound. Not the crack of splintering wood, but a dull metallic thud. The axe head had punched straight through a rotting plank, stopping dead. I pulled it back, and in the hole it left I saw something. Something that didn't belong. I knelt, my heart suddenly pounding for a different reason, and brushed away the splinters. There, nestled in the darkness beneath the floor, was a flat iron handle. For a long moment I just stared at the iron handle, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The cold, the exhaustion, the storm raging outside, it all seemed to fade into a dull background hum. A frantic, wild curiosity stronger than any fear or despair took hold of me. My numb fingers fumbled as I dug away the splintered wood around the handle. It was attached to a heavy square trapdoor, its seams almost invisible against the surrounding floorboards. I wedged the blade of the axe into the seam and pried with all my remaining strength. With a groan of ancient protesting wood, the door lifted a few inches. A blast of stale, musty air, the scent of earth and time and forgotten things, rushed up to meet me. I dropped the axe and gripped the handle with both hands, pulling with a grunt of exertion. The heavy door swung open, revealing a dark, gaping hole in the floor and a set of steep wooden steps leading down into blackness. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the howl of the wind. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to turn on the flashlight. The narrow beam cut through the darkness, illuminating a small earthen cellar. But this was no ordinary cellar. It wasn't a place for storing preserves or old tools. The space, about 10 feet by 10 feet, was filled with metal trunks and heavy wooden chests stacked neatly against the walls. They were old, bound with iron straps, the kind of chests you only see in movies about pirates and buried treasure. It made no sense. This was a forgotten cabin in the middle of Alaska, not a Caribbean island. A part of me wondered if I was hallucinating, if the cold had finally broken my mind. Driven by an irresistible pull, I descended the steps, my phone held out in front of me like a talisman. The air in the cellar was still and cold, the silence absolute. I ran the beam of light over the chests. They were real. I reached out and touched the rough, splintered wood of the nearest one. It was solid, heavy, and very real. A large, rusty padlock held it shut. Without a second thought, I went back up, grabbed the axe, and returned to the cellar. I placed the sharp edge of the axe against the padlock's shackle and brought the flat side down hard with a heavy piece of firewood. The metal shrieked in protest, but on the third strike, it snapped. My breath hitched in my throat. With trembling hands, I lifted the heavy lid. The beam from my phone's flashlight fell upon the contents, and I forgot how to breathe. It was gold. Stacks of gleaming, heavy gold bars, each one stamped with a weight and purity mark. They shone with a deep, buttery luster, an impossible fairy tale sight in this rustic tomb. My mind reeled. This had to be worth millions. I reached in and picked one up. It was incredibly heavy, the solid, undeniable weight of a fortune. The cold metal seemed to thrum with a latent energy, a concentrated power that felt both thrilling and terrifying. I moved to the next chest. My movements frantic now. I broke the lock and threw it open. This one wasn't filled with gold. It was filled with jewels. Diamonds, rubies, emeralds, all jumbled together like a king's private hoard, sparkling and flashing in the light, casting a kaleidoscope of colors against the damp earth walls. Beside them were thick leather-bound folders. I opened one. It was filled with legal documents. Property deeds for vast tracts of land all over Alaska. Mineral rights claims for copper and silver deposits. Stock certificates for mining corporations I had never heard of. My mind, numb with cold and shock, couldn't even begin to calculate the value of what I was looking at. This wasn't a fortune. It was an empire. A hidden, silent empire built in the shadows. After opening a third and fourth chest, each revealing more of the same, my eyes fell upon a smaller, more intricately carved wooden box, sitting alone on a dusty shelf. Unlike the others, it wasn't locked. It felt different, more personal. I lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a single thick envelope made of heavy cream-colored paper. My name, Liam, was written on the front in the elegant, familiar handwriting of my mother. My hands shook so violently I could barely open it. I unfolded the pages within, and as I began to read the letter, her voice, warm and clear, filled the silence of my mind as if she were standing right there beside me. "My dearest Liam," she began. "If you are reading this, it means so many things. It means you survived the journey. It means you were strong enough to not give up. And it means you have found the true inheritance your father and I have left for you." I read on, my eyes devouring the words. She explained everything. My father David was a shrewd investor, far more successful than he ever let on. He had spent decades quietly acquiring this wealth, converting his profits into untraceable tangible assets, hiding them away from a world he didn't trust. He saw the greed and weakness in the financial systems, and he wanted to build something real, something that would last. We saw the man you were becoming. Liam. Her voice in my head continued, full of a love that brought hot tears to my eyes. We saw your quiet strength, your patience, your good heart. We also saw Noah. We love your brother, but he is impulsive, drawn to the flash and glamour of wealth. A fortune like this given to him directly would have destroyed him. He would have squandered it, and it would have made him a target for every charlatan and predator. The words on the page began to blur as tears streamed down my face. Leaving you this cabin was not a punishment, my son. It was a test, and it was the greatest act of faith we could imagine. We knew that only a person with true character could survive the hardship and earn the right to this legacy. We didn't leave you $1 million. We left you a responsibility. We trusted you, Liam. We trusted you to be the guardian of our family's future, to use this wealth wisely, to build something meaningful with it. It was too much. The validation, the love, the sheer crushing weight of their faith in me was more overwhelming than all the gold and jewels combined. They hadn't seen me as a failure. They had seen me as the only one who was worthy. All those years of feeling like an afterthought, of being the quiet disappointment, it had all been a misunderstanding. They weren't ignoring me. They were watching me. But the letter wasn't finished. The tone of the last paragraph shifted, becoming urgent, serious. You must be careful, she wrote. Your father made this fortune through dealings with powerful and sometimes dangerous men. They do not know about this place. They must never know. This wealth makes you a target. You must be invisible. Tell no one what you have found. Do not trust anyone, not even your brother. Noah is not malicious, but he is weak, and he could be used against you. Be smart, be quiet, and above all, be safe. I finished the letter and let the pages fall into my lap. I sat there on the cold, damp floor of the cellar, surrounded by a treasure worth tens of millions of dollars, and I had never felt less triumphant in my life. The initial dizzying shock of the discovery had evaporated, replaced by a heavy, sobering reality. This wasn't a winning lottery ticket. It was a burden, a secret that I had to carry alone, a legacy that came with a threat I couldn't yet comprehend. They had not left me a gift. They had left me a mission. In that moment, sitting in the darkness beneath the ruins of my inheritance, the pathetic loser from Boston died, and a guardian forged by cold and fire and a dead woman's trust was born. For what felt like an eternity, I remained in the cold, silent cellar, the weight of my mother's letter in my hand and the immense gravity of the treasure pressing down on me. My mind was a whirlwind of shock, grief, and a terrifying, exhilarating sense of purpose. But as the adrenaline began to fade, a single primal reality reasserted itself with brutal clarity. The cold. I was still freezing. The storm still raged. All the gold in the world meant nothing if I died of hypothermia before sunrise. With a resolve I didn't know I possessed, I stood up. I looked one last time at the impossible fortune, then turned away. I climbed the wooden steps, my movements slow and deliberate, and pulled the heavy trapdoor shut. The click of the door falling into place was a definitive sound. I was sealing away the secret. I was choosing survival over wealth, the present over the future. The fortune was a problem for tomorrow. Today I had to fix this broken house. Today I had to fix myself. The weeks that followed were the hardest and most meaningful of my life. I did not venture back down into the cellar. The treasure remained a buried secret, a silent weight beneath the floorboards that I refused to acknowledge until I had earned the right to. Instead, I poured every ounce of my energy into the cabin. It became my singular obsession, a physical manifestation of the broken man I was determined to rebuild. My first task was the roof. The gaping hole was a constant mocking reminder of my vulnerability, letting in the snow and the wind. I found a pile of old cedar shingles in a dilapidated shed out back, miraculously preserved. I knew nothing about construction, but I learned. I spent days in the freezing cold, my fingers clumsy and numb, carefully nailing each shingle into place. Every hammer blow was a strike against my own weakness. Every sealed seam was a small victory against the chaos that had consumed my life. When I finally finished and stood inside the cabin, sheltered from the elements for the first time, a profound sense of accomplishment washed over me. I had not just patched a roof, I had created sanctuary. Next were the windows. The jagged, broken panes were like the shattered pieces of my past. I painstakingly removed them, then used thick sheets of plastic I found in the shed to create temporary weatherproof seals. It wasn't elegant, but it stopped the wind. Later, when the storm had passed and I was able to make a trip to the nearest town, I spent a small amount of my own dwindling cash on new panes of glass. Installing them was a delicate, precise task. As the first clear, clean pane slid into place, the pale Alaskan sunlight streamed into the cabin, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I was letting the light in, and it felt like I was chasing the shadows out of more than just the cabin. Day by day, I transformed the ruin into a home, and in doing so, transformed myself. I learned to chop wood with a steady rhythmic swing, the axe feeling like an extension of my own arm. The blisters on my hands hardened into thick protective calluses. I taught myself to hunt my first attempts clumsy and unsuccessful. But the first time I successfully tracked and brought down a snowshoe hare, I felt a primal connection to the land, a deep respect for the life I had taken to sustain my own. I was no longer a consumer in a world of convenience. I was a participant in the raw, honest cycle of survival. My appearance changed dramatically. The soft, pale man from Boston disappeared. My skin was weathered by the sun and wind. My body grew leaner and harder from the constant physical labor. A thick beard covered my jaw and my hair grew long and unkempt. But the biggest change was in my eyes. The haunted, self-pitying look was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady confidence. The constant chatter of anxiety in my head had ceased, replaced by a profound and peaceful silence. I had found a rhythm with the land, a purpose in the simple, demanding tasks of each day. Only after the cabin felt secure, after it felt like a fortress I had built with my own two hands, did I allow myself to confront the legacy that lay dormant beneath my feet. At night, by the light of a kerosene lamp, I would descend into the cellar. But I wasn't drawn to the gold or the jewels. I was drawn to the leather folders. I spent countless hours poring over my father's documents, the deeds, the surveys, the complex legal frameworks of his hidden empire. It was like getting to know a man I had never truly understood. I saw his genius, his foresight, his meticulous planning. These were not the impulsive gambles of a reckless man. This was the work of a master strategist who saw the world with a clarity I could only marvel at. I spread the maps out on the floor, tracing the lines of his properties, understanding the immense untapped potential of the land he had entrusted to me. The weight of his trust settled on my shoulders not as a burden, but as a mantle of honor. I began to make my own notes, to formulate my own plans, to think not just as a survivor, but as a custodian. One evening, after a long day of reinforcing the cabin's foundation, I finished my last and most important project, the fireplace. I had painstakingly cleaned the chimney and remortared the loose stones. I carefully laid a fire, and for the first time it caught, immediately roaring to life with a warm, crackling sound that filled the small room. I pulled up a simple wooden chair I had repaired and sat before the hearth, the flickering orange light washing over me, the heat sinking deep into my weary bones. I looked around the small rustic room. The roof was whole. The windows were clear. A fire burned brightly in the hearth. It was no longer a ruin. It was no longer a symbol of my exile. It was my home. A home I had earned, a home I had built. And in that moment, for the first time in many, many months, a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I had been sent to the end of the world to be forgotten, but instead, I had found the very center of my own. The seasons in Alaska do not change with the gentle subtlety I knew in Boston. They are absolute monumental shifts in the state of being. The winter had been a monolithic entity of survival, a brutal, clarifying force that had scoured away the man I used to be. Now, the spring was an explosion, a riot of life so fierce and sudden, it felt like a form of beautiful violence. The glaciers of snow that had held the world in a frozen white grip for months finally surrendered weeping meltwater into streams that roared with newfound purpose. The skeletal branches of the birch and aspen trees, which had looked like brittle charcoal against the snow, were suddenly enveloped in a haze of electric green. The very air, once thin and sharp enough to cut, was now thick with the scent of damp earth pine sap and the sweet, delicate perfume of 1,000 tiny wildflowers pushing their way toward the sun. I had found a rhythm here, a life measured not by clocks and calendars, but by the arc of the sun and the needs of the land. My days were spent in a state of productive motion that felt more like meditation than labor. I walked my property lines, learning the contours of every hill, the secrets of every ravine. I discovered beaver dams that had created new ponds, and I would sit for hours watching the patient, industrious creatures, feeling a kinship with their quiet work. I repaired the old shed, organized my father's tools, and even built a small, sturdy bridge over a creek that separated the cabin from a high meadow. Every nail I hammered, every stone I moved, felt like an act of creation, a tangible assertion of my presence and my purpose. I was no longer a ghost haunting a ruin. I was a custodian, a homesteader, the quiet king of a silent, sprawling kingdom. The cellar had transformed from a source of shock into a library of strategy. The golden jewels held little allure for me now. They were simply assets, pieces on a chessboard my father had laid out. The real treasure was in the leather-bound ledgers, the meticulously drawn maps, the decades of careful planning. I spent the long evenings by lamplight, not as a son reading a will, but as an apprentice studying the work of a master. The weight of it all, which had once felt so crushing, had settled onto my shoulders like a well-worn coat, familiar and fitting. The loneliness I had dreaded had become a profound and welcome solitude. It was on an afternoon so clear and bright it felt polished that the past came screaming back to claim me. I was outside near the wood line, splitting logs for the autumn that already felt like a distant promise. The axe rose and fell in a steady, practiced rhythm, the clean scent of split pine filling the air. The only sounds were the thud of the steel, the whisper of the wind in the trees, and the distant cry of a hawk circling high above. It was a symphony of peace, and then it was shattered. A sound so alien and jarring it felt like a physical violation pierced the tranquility. It was a high-pitched electronic shriek, a frantic synthetic ringing that had no place in this wild world. For a disoriented moment I couldn't place it. My mind, now attuned to the subtle language of the wilderness, struggled to comprehend this intrusive noise. Then, with a sickening jolt of recognition, I knew. It was coming from the cabin, from beneath the cabin, the satellite phone. A cold dread, slick and immediate, washed over me. In one of the metal trunks, my father had packed an old, clunky satellite phone in a hard plastic case, a relic for a dire emergency I had hoped would never come. I had never even touched it. But the ringing was insistent, a shrill, hysterical summons from the life I had shed, the world I had escaped. A world of noise and obligation and pain. I didn't need to see the caller ID. I knew with an absolute and chilling certainty who was on the other end of that signal. I let the axe fall from my hand, its blade sinking into the chopping block. My heart, which had been beating with the steady rhythm of physical labor, began to pound with a frantic, anxious tempo I had almost forgotten. I walked back toward the cabin, each step feeling heavy, reluctant. This felt like a betrayal of the peace I had worked so hard to build. The familiar scent of wood smoke from my chimney, usually a comfort, now felt like a fragile defense against an invading force. Inside, I lifted the trap door, the well-oiled hinges moving in eerie silence against the phone's continued shrieking. The ringing grew louder, more frantic, as I descended the steps into the cool, earthy darkness. The phone sat on a wooden shelf, a black plastic brick vibrating with a desperate energy, its small screen casting a sickly green glow. The number was from Boston. Of course it was. Taking a deep, fortifying breath, I picked up the cold plastic and pressed the answer button. Hello? My voice was a rough, gravelly thing, a stranger's voice even to my own ears. Liam. Oh, thank God, Liam, is that you? The voice that erupted from the speaker was a torrent of panic. It was Noah, but a version of him I had never heard before. The smooth, self-assured cadence, the casual arrogance that had defined him his entire life had been utterly stripped away, leaving only the raw, ragged edge of sheer terror. It's me, Noah, I said. The calmness in my own voice surprised me. Liam, you have to help me. I'm in so much trouble, man, you have no idea. He was babbling, his words tumbling over each other in a frantic rush. I made some investments. This guy, he seemed so legit. Everyone was getting in on it. A tech startup, something about decentralized data solutions. He said it was a sure thing, a unicorn. I put in almost everything, Liam. To show Dad, you know. To show I could make the family fortune even bigger. I remained silent, letting the pathetic confession hang in the air. I pictured him probably pacing in the cavernous living room of our parents' house, a place where he had always been a prince. It was a sham, Liam. A complete fraud. The guy just disappeared, vanished. The whole company. It was just a website and a fancy office. The money is gone, all of it. He paused, and I heard a choked, wet sound, the unmistakable noise of a man trying to suppress a sob. They're coming for the house, Liam. The creditors, the people I borrowed from to cover the initial losses. They're going to take Mom and Dad's house. Everything they worked for, I flushed it all away. I felt a ghost of an emotion, a faint spectral flicker of satisfaction, but it died as quickly as it came. It was replaced by a profound emptiness. This grand drama felt hollow, a tale told by an idiot. His world of stocks and startups and social status seemed like a flimsy, paper-thin reality compared to the solid, unyielding truth of the mountains outside my door. That land, he finally gasped, arriving at the true purpose of his call. The cabin. I knew it was more than just some worthless shack. I had a lawyer do a quiet search on the county records after you were gone. It's a massive parcel, Liam. It has to be worth something, right? It has to be valuable. You need to sell it. Now. You need to sell it and send me the money. It's family money, Liam. It's our safety net family money. The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost breathtaking. Before I could formulate a response, I heard a muffled sound in the background, a frantic, urgent whisper. It was her. Chloe. Her voice was a venomous hiss, clearly not intended for my ears. Did you tell him? Tell him what I told you to say. Then I heard a faint scuffle, and her voice, now syrupy, sweet and dripping with false concern, came through the speaker, closer now. Liam, baby. Is that really you? It's me, Chloe, I said, my voice flat. Oh, Liam, I have been so worried. I've thought about you every single day. Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. I was in shock. I didn't mean what I said. Noah told me what happened to him, and all I could think about was you all alone up there. We need you, Liam. I need you. The performance was so transparent, so utterly devoid of genuine emotion that I almost laughed. It was the clumsy, desperate gambit of a parasite seeking a new host. The woman who had looked at me with such pure, unadulterated contempt was now calling me baby. The pity I felt for Noah curdled into a cold, hard disgust for her. They deserved each other. Liam, Noah's voice cut back in regaining control of the phone. She's right. She misses you. We both do. Please. Think about our family. Think about Mom and Dad's home, their legacy. His mention of legacy was the final straw. I thought of my mother's letter of the trust they had placed in me. I thought of their true legacy resting in silent golden testament all around me. A legacy of quiet strength and foresight. What Noah was trying to save wasn't their legacy. It was his own monument to failure. Family money, I finally said, my voice as calm and as cold as the glacial streams that fed my land. You received your portion of the family money, Noah. You received all of it, as I recall. This, I said, my gaze sweeping around the dark, silent cellar. This is my portion. A choked, sputtering sound came from the other end. But you don't need it. You're living like a hermit in the middle of nowhere, a savage in a broken-down shack. What could you possibly need with all that land? I need it. I need it to save our family's honor. The word honor struck me with the force of a physical blow. I thought of the honor I had discovered in rebuilding a roof with my own 2 hands and providing my own food and keeping a silent, solemn promise to my parents. His definition of honor was a hollow thing, a fragile facade built from expensive possessions and the fleeting approval of others. Honor, I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Or your extravagant lifestyle, Noah? Are you trying to save the house or the sports cars, the designer clothes, and the pathetic illusion that you're some kind of business prodigy? A wounded silence was my answer. I had never spoken to him with such clarity, such brutal honesty. The old Liam would have stumbled over his words, been cowed by the confrontation. The old Liam was a ghost. You don't understand. He finally stammered, his voice losing its final shred of conviction. Please, Liam. As your brother, I am on my knees. I am begging you. I allowed the silence to stretch to become its own form of torture. I could have reveled in this moment. I could have made him grovel, made him list every single humiliation he and his friends had ever inflicted upon me. The desire for that kind of petty revenge flickered within me, a final dying ember of the man I used to be. But it felt pointless. It felt beneath me. My ultimate revenge wasn't in his destruction. It was in my complete and utter indifference to his fate. No, I said. The word was not spoken in anger. It was a simple statement of fact, as simple and as final as a mountain. Liam, wait, don't. I pressed the end call button, severing the connection, silencing his frantic plea. The sudden profound peace of the cellar rushed back in, washing over me like a baptism. I placed the satellite phone back on its shelf, a contaminated artifact from a dead civilization. I climbed the steps, pulled the trapdoor shut, and walked out of my cabin back into the clean, bright air of the afternoon. I picked up my axe, its wooden handle familiar and reassuring in my hand. I looked out over the vast greening wilderness that was mine. It was a kingdom built on substance and silence. And the frantic, desperate cries from a world away were nothing more than a faint, pathetic echo already lost in the vast, unforgiving, and beautiful quiet of the North. The silence that followed Noah's call was more profound than any I had yet experienced in Alaska. It was not an absence of sound, but a presence of peace, a quiet affirmation that I had finally, irrevocably severed the last toxic tie to my past. The ghosts of Boston had been given their final say, and I had turned them away, not with anger or vengeance, but with the quiet strength of a man who finally knew his own worth. The days that followed were filled with a new kind of clarity, a sense of purpose, unburdened by the need for validation or the fear of judgment. Several days later, after a long trek to the nearest town for supplies, I connected to the internet at a small local library to arrange a delivery. As my inbox loaded, a new email sat at the top of the list, a name that sent a faint phantom chill down my spine. Chloe Davis. The subject line was a single pathetic word. Us. Against my better judgment, I clicked it open. The email was a masterpiece of manipulative fiction, a carefully crafted performance of regret. She wrote of sleepless nights, of the hollow victory of Noah's inheritance, of how she realized too late that material things meant nothing without the quiet strength and decency she had always seen in me. She painted a picture of herself as a victim of ambition, a woman who had made a terrible mistake and now saw the world with clear eyes. She ended with a plea, a saccharine vision of a future together. I don't care about the money, Liam, she wrote. I just want you. Let me come to Alaska. Let me prove to you that the woman you fell in love with is still here waiting for you. We can build a life together, just us against the world. I read the email twice. The first time I felt a flicker of the old familiar sting of betrayal. The second time I felt nothing at all. It was like reading a poorly written script, the emotions so transparently false, the motives so glaringly obvious. She didn't want me. She wanted what I represented, a second chance at a life of luxury, a lifeboat to jump to from Noah's sinking ship. She wasn't in love with the man I had become. She was in love with the number she imagined was in my bank account. The old Liam would have agonized over this. He would have dissected every word, searching for a crumb of sincerity. He might have even been tempted by the allure of winning, of having the woman who rejected him come crawling back. But that Liam was buried under 6 feet of snow and a lifetime of hard lessons. I looked at her words one last time, a final epitaph for a love that had never been real. Then with a single decisive click, I moved the email to the trash and emptied it, watching the digital record of her plea vanish into oblivion. There would be no reply. There would be no second thoughts. The past was not just a closed door. It was a building that had been completely and utterly demolished. With that final ghost exorcised, I felt a profound sense of freedom. My future was a blank map, and for the first time, I was the one holding the pen. I returned to the cabin not with a heavy heart, but with a clear and focused mind. That evening, I did not go out to chop wood or repair a fence. I descended into the cellar, but this time it was not as a survivor or a student. It was as a founder. I unrolled the large survey maps of my father's properties and laid them out on the floor, the lamplight casting a golden glow on the intricate lines and faded names. I took out my own notebooks filled with months of research and careful calculations. The time for learning was over. It was time to build. My plan was not my father's, but it was born from his vision. He had acquired this wealth. My purpose would be to preserve it, to make it grow, and to turn it into something that honored the trust he and my mother had placed in me. The next morning, I used the satellite phone not to receive a call from the past, but to make a call to the future. I had spent a week researching law firms and Anchorage firms that specialized not in hostile takeovers or corporate raiding, but in legacy trusts and sustainable asset management. The man who answered was a partner at the firm, a calm, professional voice that was a world away from Noah's frantic desperation. I introduced myself not as a long-lost heir, but as a private investor looking to establish a significant trust. I was clear, concise, and confident. I laid out my terms and my vision. I didn't want to liquidate the mineral rights. I wanted to lease them to responsible, environmentally conscious companies. I didn't want to sell the land to developers. I wanted to place the most pristine areas into a conservation easement, and the trust itself would not bear my name. It would be called the David and Sarah Carter Legacy Trust. Its purpose would be to manage these assets for steady, long-term growth, with a portion of the annual proceeds dedicated to funding scholarships for geology students at the University of Alaska. It was a plan that honored my father's shrewdness and my mother's gentle heart. It was my plan. As the legal framework began to take shape over the next few weeks, I knew I had one final choice to make. I could, if I wanted, manage the trust from Boston. I could return a king, buy a bigger house than Noah's, and savor the looks on the faces of everyone who had written me off. The temptation was there, a faint, seductive whisper from the ego of the man I used to be. But one evening, as the sun began its slow, magnificent descent, I walked up to the high meadow behind the cabin. The sky was a breathtaking canvas of orange, pink, and deep purple, the colors reflecting off the distant snow-capped peaks. A cool breeze smelling of pine and clean earth washed over me. I looked down at my small, sturdy cabin, a curl of smoke rising from its chimney, a single warm light glowing in the window. It wasn't a ruin or a symbol of exile. It was the only real home I had ever known. Boston was a city of ghosts. Alaska was a land of substance. Here, a man was measured not by his family name or the size of his bank account, but by the warmth of his fire, the strength of his hands, and the quiet integrity of his word. I was no longer Liam Carter, the pathetic loser. I was not even Liam Carter, the secret millionaire. I was simply Liam, a man who had been given a second chance, a man who had found his place in the world. And that place was here. A profound, unshakable peace settled over me. I would not be going back. My life was here in this vast, beautiful, and unforgiving land. I was the guardian of my parents' legacy, and I would not abandon my post. I took a deep breath, the cold, pure air filling my lungs, and for the first time since I could remember, I felt completely and utterly free. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face as I watched the last sliver of the sun disappear behind the mountains. The long night was over. My day had just begun. True wealth isn't what you inherit, but who you become when you have nothing left to lose. The world may judge you by material possessions, but your real value is forged in the silent battles you fight alone and the integrity you maintain when no one is watching.